Maya sat across from her therapist, Dr. Levine, studying the geometric pattern of the area rug beneath her feet. 15 minutes into their session, and she still hadn't mentioned the trip. She'd talked about work stress, her mother's health concerns, even the neighbor's noisy renovation of anything but the reason she'd finally sought therapy after years of dismissing it as not for her. Maya, Dr. Levine said gently, you mentioned last week that there was something specific you wanted to discuss today. Something that happened on your business trip to Chicago. Maya's hands tightened around the throw pillow in her lap. 3 weeks had passed since that trip. 21 days of carrying a secret that felt like stones in her pockets, dragging her deeper underwater with each passing day. I did something, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I never thought I was capable of. Dr. Levine waited, her expression neutral yet encouraging. I cheated on David. The words hung in the air between them, solid and irrevocable. After 8 years of marriage, I slept with someone else. Saying it aloud should have brought relief. Isn't that what people said about confession? Instead, Maya felt the familiar wave of self-loathing rise within her. She'd spent 3 weeks alternating between numbing herself to what she'd done and drowning in shame over it. Can you tell me about what happened? Dr. Levine asked, her tone free of judgment. Maya took a deep breath. If she was going to do this, really do this, not just pay lip service to the idea of therapy, she needed to be honest. It was at a conference. Financial analysis, boring stuff, really. Maya smiled bitterly at the irony of describing the setting as boring when what happened was anything but. I was presenting a paper. There was this man, another presenter. We got talking at the reception afterward. One thing led to another, and she trailed off, the memories flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. The crowded hotel bar, the intellectual spark of their conversation about market trends and risk analysis. The way he'd looked at her, not as a wife or colleague or any of her usual roles, but as a woman, desirable and desired. We ended up in his room, she continued, forcing the words out. I told myself it was just drinks, just conversation, but I knew. Some part of me knew exactly what I was doing, even as I pretended I didn't. What do you think you were looking for in that moment? Dr. Levine asked. The question caught Maya off guard. She'd expected judgment, or perhaps probing about the details of the encounter itself, not this invitation to examine her own motivations. I don't know, she said automatically, then paused. No, that's not true. I do know. I was looking to feel something different, to be someone different, even if just for a night. Different from what? Maya considered the question. Different from the person I've become. This responsible, predictable woman who does everything right, who never disappoints anyone. She laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar to her own ears. Well, I've certainly shattered that image now, haven't I? You seem angry with yourself. Shouldn't I be? Maya challenged. I betrayed my husband. The man who has loved me, supported me, trusted me completely for 8 years. Who looks at me like I'm still the woman he fell in love with in college, even though I barely recognize that person anymore. Dr. Levine leaned forward slightly. Maya, what's happened since you returned from the trip? Have you told David? Maya shook her head, her chest tightening at the thought. No, I don't know how to describe it. It's like I'm desperate to change everything about my life, but simultaneously paralyzed by the fear of losing what I have. She met Dr. Levine's eyes directly for the first time. Is that crazy? To want to blow up your entire existence because of one terrible mistake? It's not crazy, Dr. Levine assured her. Often, when we do something that violates our self-image, something we never thought we were capable of, it forces us to question everything we thought we knew about ourselves. The impulse to change can be a response to that dissonance. Maya nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in those words. Since returning from Chicago, she'd been almost manic in her desire for change. She'd researched graduate programs in fields completely unrelated to her finance career. She'd filled online shopping carts with clothes unlike anything in her current wardrobe, only to abandon them at checkout. She'd even caught herself looking at apartment listings in different cities, as if geographical escape could solve her internal crisis. I keep wondering who I really am, she admitted. If I could do this one, something I've always condemned in others, something I truly believed I would never do, then what else about myself have I been wrong about? What else am I capable of? These are powerful questions, Dr. Levine acknowledged. But before we explore them further, I'd like to understand more about your marriage. What was your relationship with David like before the trip? Maya sighed, sinking back into the couch. Good. Solid. We've always been steady, I guess. College sweethearts who grew up together, built a life. We rarely fight. He's kind, supportive of my career. She paused, feeling the familiar knot form in her throat. He deserves better than what I did. And what about underneath that steadiness? What hasn't been said or addressed? The question pierced through Maya's practiced narrative about her marriage van, the one she presented to friends and family, the one that emphasized stability and partnership while glossing over the quieter truths. We've been drifting, I suppose, for a while now. Maya twisted her wedding ring around her finger. Not dramatically, not in a way that would justify what I did. Just living parallel lives under the same roof. Separate bedrooms for the past year because of his snoring and my insomnia. At least that's what we tell ourselves. Separate friends, separate interests. Still caring about each other, but not really seeing each other anymore. She thought about the morning she'd left for Chicago, how David had kissed her goodbye at the door, a perfunctory peck while checking his watch, how neither of them had said, "I love you," not out of malice, but from the sheer force of routine that had gradually replaced intention in their relationship. When was the last time you felt truly connected to David? Dr. Levine asked. Maya closed her eyes, searching her memory. His father's funeral, maybe, 2 years ago? We held each other in bed that night, really talked about life and loss and fears. She swallowed hard. It feels like we've been underwater since then, communicating in muffled signals, drifting further apart with the current. And now? Now I come home every day carrying this secret, and he looks at me with such trust. He asks about my day, and I answer with sanitized half-truths, and we eat dinner watching Netflix, and I feel like I'm suffocating in the life we've built. Maya's voice cracked. And the worst part is, I don't know if I'm suffocating because of what I did, or if what I did was because I was already suffocating. Dr. Levine nodded thoughtfully. So the question becomes, what do you want now? Not just regarding whether to tell David about the infidelity, but more broadly, what kind of life are you seeking? What kind of relationship? What kind of person do you want to be? The questions landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through Maya's consciousness. What did she want? She'd been so busy maintaining the life she and David had constructed that she'd stopped asking herself that fundamental question. I want, Maya started, then faltered. I want to be honest with myself, with David. I want to feel alive again, not just going through the motions. I want connection that feels real, not performed. She took a shaky breath. I want to know if David and I still have anything left worth fighting for, or if we've been prolonging something that quietly died years ago. These are important insights, Dr. Levine said, and they point to something crucial. Your infidelity is not the core issue here, but rather a symptom of deeper questions and disconnections in your life. That doesn't excuse what I did, Maya insisted. No, it doesn't, Dr. Levine agreed. But understanding the context doesn't mean absolving yourself of responsibility. It means recognizing that addressing the infidelity alone won't resolve the underlying issues that led to this point. As their session time came to an end, Dr. Levine left Maya with a question to consider before their next meeting. What would taking full responsibility for your choice of past and future look like to you? On the drive home, Maya turned the question over in her mind. Full responsibility, not just for the night in Chicago, but for the slow drift of her marriage, for the parts of herself she'd suppressed in pursuit of a picture-perfect life, for the unspoken truths she'd hidden even from herself. The house was empty when she arrived, David still at work. She moved through the rooms with new awareness, seeing their shared space through the lens of Dr. Levine's questions. The living room, tastefully decorated but impersonal, Could have been from a catalog. No photographs on the walls, just abstract art they'd chosen, because it matched the couch. The kitchen, spotless and rarely used beyond basic meal prep. The separate bedrooms that had once been a temporary solution to sleep issues, but had gradually become permanent, neither of them questioning the arrangement. Had they built a life, or just the appearance of one? Maya found herself in their home office, opening the bottom desk drawer where she kept old journals. She hadn't written consistently in years, but perhaps her past self might offer some insight into how she'd arrived at this crossroads. The journal from 5 years ago was filled with career ambitions, excitement about a promotion, detailed tracking of their savings toward buying this house, responsible, forward-thinking, everything she'd been raised to value. But as she flipped through more recent entries, a different narrative emerged in the increasingly sparse passages. Restlessness. Questions about whether climbing the corporate ladder was truly fulfilling. Concerns about the emotional distance growing between her and David. Written and then seemingly forgotten, never addressed. An entry from just before David's father died caught her attention. Sometimes I feel like we're both playing roles in a story we agreed to years ago, without checking if it still fits who we've become. Dee seems content with the script. Am I the only one who feels like I'm reciting someone else's lines? Maya closed the journal, a heaviness settling in her chest. The woman who'd written those words had been trying to warn her, to make her pay attention to the widening gap between her external life and her internal truth. But she'd ignored those warnings, pushed forward on the predetermined path until something in her broke open in a hotel room in Chicago. When David came home that evening, Maya studied him with new eyes as he moved through their familiar routine F briefcase on the hall table. Shoes off, tie loosened, quick kiss on her cheek, question about dinner. He looked tired. Not just end-of-workday tired, but soul tired. Had she ever really noticed that before? "Can we talk?" she asked, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. David looked up, surprise crossing his features. "Sure. Everything okay?" They sat at the kitchen table, the formal dining room being another space they maintained but rarely used. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the cool surface. "I've been seeing a therapist," she began, watching his reaction carefully. David's eyebrows rose. "Oh, that's good, I guess? I didn't know you were struggling with anything." The genuine confusion in his voice confirmed what Maya had suspected. The careful facade she'd maintained hadn't just fooled others, but had created a barrier to true intimacy with her husband. "I am struggling," she admitted. "I have been for a while. With us. With who I've become. With a lot of things." David's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Are you unhappy with our marriage?" The direct question demanded a direct answer. "I don't know," Maya said honestly. "That's part of what I'm trying to figure out. But I do know that we've been drifting apart for years, and neither of us has been willing to admit it or talk about it." David was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the table. I thought you were content with how things are. You never said anything." "Neither did you," Maya pointed out gently. "We both just kept going through the motions, getting more disconnected every day. Separate bedrooms, separate lives under the same roof." "The bedrooms were because of my snoring," David said defensively, but his expression suggested he recognized the inadequacy of this explanation. "At first, maybe, but it's been over a year, David. We found a solution that let us avoid addressing the real issue that we've stopped trying to connect with each other. When was the last time we had a real conversation about something that matters? When was the last time we made love?" David flinched at the bluntness of her questions. "Is there someone else?" he asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the table. "Is that what this is about?" The moment of truth arrived sooner than Maya had anticipated. She had come to this conversation intending only to open a dialogue about the state of their marriage, not to confess her infidelity immediately. But David's direct question left her with a clear choice. Continue the pattern of evasion and half-truths, or take the first step toward the honesty she claimed to want. "There was an incident," she said, her voice barely audible. "On my trip to Chicago, David's face went pale, then flushed with color. An incident? He repeated, his voice tight with controlled emotion. What exactly does that mean, Maya? I slept with someone else. The confession hung in the kitchen air, irrevocable. It was one night. It didn't mean anything. Don't, David interrupted, standing abruptly. Don't give me the klishkis. It didn't mean anything. If it didn't mean anything, it wouldn't have happened. He was right, of course. Maya had retreated to the standard script for infidelity, the minimizing language of affair confessions, but she'd promised herself honesty. You're right, she acknowledged. It did mean something, but not what you might think. It wasn't about him. I can barely remember his face now. It was about me trying to feel something, anything, other than the numbness that's been growing inside me. It was wrong and selfish and completely unfair to you, and I'm so sorry. David stared at her as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. Perhaps they had both become strangers to each other and to themselves, playing roles that no longer fit. I need some air, he said finally, grabbing his keys from the counter. Don't wait up. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, anticlimactic compared to the storm Maya had unleashed. She remained at the kitchen table, the weight of her confession both heavier and lighter than she had imagined. Heavier in the pain it had clearly caused David, lighter in no longer carrying the secret alone. Dr. Levine's question returned to her. What would taking full responsibility look like? It would start with this how, the painful truth, the consequences, the uncertainty of what came next. It would continue with the harder work of examining who she was, what she wanted, and whether the marriage could be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than expectations and appearances. David didn't come home that night. Maya lay awake in her bedroom, not their bedroom, but hers. A distinction that now seemed like a glaring red flag. She'd somehow missed Furs wondering where he'd gone, what he was thinking, whether he would return at all. In the morning, she called in sick to work and waited. Around noon, David finally walked through the door, looking exhausted but composed. I stayed at Mark's, he said, answering her unasked question. Mark was his oldest friend, the best man at their wedding. I needed to think. Maya nodded, giving him space to continue. I'm angry, he said carefully, as if testing the word. Furious, actually. But I'm also, I don't know, sad, relieved, like something that's been wrong for a long time finally has a name. I understand, Maya replied, and she did. Her own emotions had followed a similar contradictory path. I want to know everything, David continued. Not the physical details, but why? When exactly? If it's happened before? If you want to leave me for him? Maya answered each question truthfully. The why rooted in her own disconnection and identity crisis rather than any specific problems with David. The when being 3 weeks ago, during the second night of the conference, that no, nothing like this had ever happened before, and that no, the other man was a virtual stranger she had no intention of seeing again. Do you want to leave me at all? David asked finally, the question that clearly weighed heaviest on his mind. Is that what all this is leading to? Maya considered her answer carefully. I don't know, she admitted. I don't want to leave the possibility of us, but I do want what's needed to change. I can't keep living the way we have been, going through the motions, avoiding the hard conversations. I started therapy because I need to understand who I really am and what I really want. And I think maybe you need to do the same. David's jaw tightened. So I'm supposed to go to therapy because you cheated? That doesn't seem fair. Not because I cheated, Maya clarified. Because we've both been sleepwalking through our marriage for years. Because neither of us has been honest about what we need or want. My cheating was my my terrible, inexcusable choice. But the problems in our marriage belong to both of us. They agreed, after hours of painful but necessary conversation, to a trial separation. David would stay with Mark for a few weeks while they both took time to think, to continue their individual therapy, David reluctantly agreeing to try a few sessions, and to decide whether they wanted to attempt rebuilding their marriage or move toward ending it. The house felt cavernous with David gone. Maya moved through the empty spaces like a ghost, alternating between periods of intense grief and moments of surprising clarity. She continued her sessions with Dr. Levine, diving deeper into the patterns that had led her to this point, her lifelong habit of meeting others' expectations at the expense of her own authentic desires, her fear of disappointing the people who mattered to her, her tendency to seek external validation rather than internal purpose. "You've been talking about change since our first session," Dr. Levine noted during their fourth meeting. "About wanting to change everything. What specific changes do you envision?" Maya had been asking herself the same question. "I think I've been approaching it backwards," she said slowly, "focusing on external changes, Flav. New career, new city, new clothes, Flav. As if those would somehow fix what's broken inside me. But that's just more of the same pattern, isn't it? Looking outward instead of inward." "That's an insightful observation," Dr. Levine commented. "So what would meaningful internal change look like?" "Learning to be honest with myself first, before I can be honest with others," Maya replied. "Recognizing what I truly value, not just what I've been taught to value. Finding purpose beyond achievement and appearance." She paused, considering how abstract these goals sounded. "Practically speaking, I've started keeping a journal again, really writing, not just listing accomplishments and goals like I used to. I've been reaching out to old friends I lost touch with when their lives took different directions than my naive children, divorce, career changes, that I judged as setbacks rather than choices." Most significantly, Maya had begun exploring the creative pursuits she'd abandoned in college when she'd switched from art to finance taking a local pottery class, sketching in the evenings. The results were amateur at best, but the process awakened something that had long been dormant: joy in creation without expectation of excellence or reward. "These may seem like small steps," she acknowledged, "but they feel more authentic than the dramatic gestures I first imagined. Less about escaping my life and more about reclaiming parts of myself I left behind." Dr. Levine nodded approvingly. "Change doesn't have to be dramatic to be profound. Sometimes the quieter transformations are the ones that truly last." 3 weeks into their separation, David suggested meeting for coffee. They chose a cafe halfway between their house and Mark's apartment, neutral territory for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. Maya arrived first, selecting a table in the corner away from other patrons. When David walked in, she was struck by how different he looked, not physically, though perhaps a bit thinner, but in his demeanor. There was a new alertness to his movements, a presence that had been missing in their day-to-day interactions for longer than she cared to admit. "You look well," she offered as he sat across from her. "Therapy," he said with a wry smile that surprised her. "Turns out you were right about that. Mark practically had to drag me to the first appointment, but it's been good. Hard but good." "I'm glad," Maya said, genuinely pleased that he had found value in the process. They exchanged careful updates about their respective weeks, the conversation polite but substantive in a way their interactions hadn't been in years. Finally, David set down his coffee cup with a decisive motion. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About us, about what happened, about what comes next." Maya nodded, bracing herself. "I'm still angry about Chicago," he continued. "I don't know if that will ever completely go away. But I've also been confronting some hard truths about my role in how our marriage deteriorated. How I checked out emotionally after my dad died. How I stopped trying, stopped noticing, stopped being present." He took a deep breath. "What I'm saying is, I see now that we were both lost, just in different ways. And while that doesn't excuse what you did, I think I understand it better now. The desperation to feel something, anything, when everything has gone numb." Maya felt tears welling in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "That's the awful irony of it all. I spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife to never disappoint you that I lost myself completely, and then I ended up causing the very pain I was so afraid of creating." "What do you want now?" David asked, echoing Dr. Levine's persistent question. "For yourself? For us?" "I want to be whole," Maya answered, the words coming from a place of newfound clarity. "I want to discover who I am when I'm not performing, not meeting expectations, not hiding behind achievement and appearances. And I want. She hesitated, uncertain if she had the right to want anything from him after what she'd done. Go on, David encouraged. I want to see if there's a way forward for us, not back to what we were. I don't think either of us wants that anymore. But forward to something new, something built on truth rather than comfort or convenience. She met his eyes directly. Is that something you might want too? David didn't answer immediately, his expression thoughtful. I don't know, he said finally. Some days I think yes, absolutely. Other days I wonder if we've hurt each other too much, drifted too far. But I do know I'm not ready to give up entirely. Not without trying to see what might be possible between the people we're becoming rather than the people we were. It wasn't a declaration of certainty, but in its honesty, it offered something more valuable, the possibility of authentic reconnection, eyes wide open to both the pain of the past and the potential of the future. They agreed to continue their separation for now, but with intentional steps toward rebuilding. Weekly dates to relearn each other, couples therapy alongside their individual sessions, complete transparency about their thoughts and feelings without the pressure of immediate decisions about their marriage. As spring turned to summer, Maya continued her inner work, the small changes gradually accumulating into something that felt like transformation. She took a part-time art class at the local community college. She had difficult but healing conversations with her parents about the pressure she'd always felt to achieve, to perform, to be exceptional rather than authentic. She reconnected with friends who knew the Maya from before, the one who laughed easily, took risks, valued experience over appearance. Her relationship with David evolved in unexpected ways. Their dates were awkward at first, both of them hyper-aware of the weight they carried. But gradually, they began to discover each other anew, not as husband and wife with years of expectations and patterns, but as two people navigating vulnerability and truth with open hearts. In July, 4 months after her confession, Maya made a decision she'd been contemplating for weeks. She gave notice at her finance job, not a dramatic resignation, but a careful transition plan that would allow her to reduce to part-time hours while she explored other possibilities. Are you sure about this? David asked when she told him over dinner. They'd recently begun spending occasional nights together at their house, though they maintained separate residences. No, Maya admitted with a small laugh. I'm not sure about anything anymore, but that's actually liberating? I've spent my whole life being sure about the next step, the right move, the responsible choice. I'm learning to live with uncertainty, to trust that clarity will come if I'm honest with myself about what brings me alive. David reached across the table, taking her hand in his, a gesture that had become frequent again in recent weeks. I'm proud of you, he said simply, not because of what you're doing, but because of how you're doing it, with courage and honesty. The words touched something deep in Maya's chest. Pride had always been connected to achievement in her mindweb, promotions, acquisitions, the external markers of success. But this was different. This was being seen for the internal work, the painful growth, the willingness to face difficult truths. I'm starting to understand something, she said, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. That day in Chicago, I was looking for an escape from myself, from the life I'd built but couldn't bear to admit wasn't making me happy. But real change doesn't come from escape. It comes from turning toward the truth, however painful, and finding a way through it. David nodded, his eyes reflecting his own hard-won insights. My therapist calls it the courage to stay. Not necessarily in a situation or relationship, but in the discomfort of growth and transformation. To not run away when things get difficult, whether externally or internally. They had both been guilty of running in their own ways. Maya, through her brief infidelity and subsequent impulse for dramatic change, David through his emotional withdrawal after his father's death and his initial reaction to Maya's confession. The real work had begun when they'd each separately and together found the courage to stay present with the messy, uncomfortable truth of their lives. By the fall, Maya had established a new rhythm. 3 days a week at her finance job, 2 days taking art and design classes, evenings spent in her makeshift home studio or with David, weekends exploring the parts of themselves and each other they had neglected for too long. They weren't fixed through neither their marriage nor their individual struggles. There were still difficult days, painful conversations, moments when the weight of past hurts threatened to overwhelm the fragile new foundation they were building. But there was also a growing sense of authenticity between them, a willingness to see and be seen that created space for genuine intimacy to reemerge. In October, just over 6 months after Maya's confession, they made the decision to fully reunite under one roof, not as a return to their former life, but as a conscious choice to build something new together. The night David moved his things back in, they sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues. Maya leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. "I was thinking about something Dr. Levine asked me in our first session," she said. "About what I was looking for that night in Chicago. I gave her an answer about wanting to feel something different, to be someone different, but I've been reflecting on it more lately." David remained quiet, giving her space to continue. "I think what I was really looking for was permission," Maya continued. "Permission to acknowledge that I wasn't happy, that the life we'd built wasn't fulfilling me, that I had lost myself somewhere along the way. But I couldn't admit any of that not to you, not even to myself. So I created a crisis that forced the issue." "That's quite an insight," David said, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I'm not excusing what I did," Maya clarified. "It was still a terrible choice with consequences we're still working through. But understanding it helps me recognize the pattern, so I don't repeat it, so I can give myself permission to speak difficult truths before they become destructive actions." David was quiet for a long moment, the swing moving gently beneath them. "Do you think we would have found our way here without what happened?" he finally asked. "To this new version of us?" Maya considered the question seriously. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'd like to think we would have eventually recognized how far we'd drifted and found the courage to address it. But honestly, we were both so committed to maintaining the appearance of a perfect life that I'm not sure we would have risked dismantling it without a catalyst." "That's the sad part, isn't it?" David mused. "That it took something so painful to break us open, to force us to look at what wasn't working." Maya nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of regret and gratitude that had become her constant companion. Regret for the pain she'd caused, gratitude for the growth it had ultimately inspired. "I think that's why I've been so focused on change," she said slowly. "Not just because of what happened in Chicago, but because I never want to become that person again, the one who's so disconnected from her truth that she makes choices that hurt the people she loves." "We're both changing," David observed. "And that's scary sometimes. But it's also necessary. Static things don't grow. They just exist." As darkness settled around them, Maya reflected on the journey of the past 7 months. From the moment of betrayal in a Chicago hotel room to this quiet evening on their porch. Their relationship forever altered, but perhaps, ultimately, strengthened by what they had endured together. The woman who had sat in Dr. Levine's office that first day, desperate to change everything about her life in the wake of her terrible choice, had indeed changed. Not through dramatic gestures or escapes, but through the harder, slower work of honest self-examination, painful truth-telling, and gradual realignment with her authentic self. The marriage had changed too, the comfortable but hollow partnership replaced by something more challenging but infinitely more real. They saw each other now, truly saw each other, with all the flaws and fears and hopes that entailed. The perfect image was shattered, but in its place stood two imperfect people choosing each other with clear eyes and open hearts. "I love you," Maya said, the words carrying a depth they hadn't held in years. Not an automatic response or a comfortable habit, but a conscious choice, made with full awareness of both the joy and the challenge of genuine connection. "I love you too," David replied, his voice reflective. "Not despite what we've been through, but partly because of it. Because I know who you really are now. Not just the perfect wife you pretended to be, but the whole, complicated, beautiful truth of you." They sat together as stars appeared in the darkening sky, their shared silence comfortable in a way it hadn't been for years. The weight of watervin, of tears shed, of truths revealed, of depths explored vin, had nearly drowned them both. But they had learned, separately and together, how to swim through the currents of change rather than being swept away by them.